What's up, everybody? Set 1.5 is just a couple days away, but before that happens, I wanted to show off just one more Set 1.0 deck that I've been having a lot of fun with recently. I like to call this my Blurple Matt Deck, as we are running both a blue and purple deck along with copies of matte from each of those two colors. The goal of this deck is a lot of draw power along with some extra memory gaining effects from the blue cards. While the deck is mostly purple, I run a small blue engine in the deck, which I found is really fun and really helps out with getting some extra memory and making your plays a little bit less predictable for opponents. And the main focus of this deck is on having a lot of draw power while also utilizing the destructive potential of some of the purple cards in this set. I think Blurple is a really fun color combination right now, and even though this is a Set 1.0 deck, I will be talking about what this type of deck could look like in Set 1.5, since it is something that I plan to continue testing and playing around with, since even though it has some weaknesses right now, it is still a really fun deck to play, and I've had some pretty good games where I'm able to catch my opponents off guard and do some fun little tricks with cards. But with that out of the way, let's get on to the actual deck. We'll be starting off with our purple cards in this deck. For our Digitama, we run the 4 copies of Devamon. Purple is pretty big on, deleting your own cards, getting a lot of things in the trash. Discarding cards, we do a lot in this deck. So it's pretty easy to get 5 cards in your trash. The extra 1,000 damage isn't really necessary. We just don't have a lot of purple baby options right now in the deck. So this is kind of the one we end up running at 4 by default. And then we run the 1 copy of Pagumon. Pagumon's pretty good, especially if you're trying to do like an Itmon or Beelzemon deck usually and trying to fill your trash with as many cards as you can. That's not really our focus for this deck, but so we just run them to have that 5th Digitama, since it's typically better to have more than less. And for this current version of this deck, we don't really care which Digitama we actually get. We just need them to Digivolve into for our level 3s. So 4 Devamon and 1 Pagumon. Moving on to our level 3s, we can't have matte in the deck without running a few copies of Gabumon. We actually run 4 of them in this deck. This actually used to be one of my least favorite level 3s for purple, but the more I've played him, the just more and more I've liked him. I'm usually never mad having him in the deck. Just getting that extra draw power with the draw 2, plus being able to discard and send anything to trash. Super useful if you have something that's just dead in your hand, you don't really want to get rid of it. And of course, because we have the purple matte, we can get that back later. This card is one of the reasons we're not running Itmon or 4 Pagumon or just a lot of trashing cards in our deck, because this kind of gives us that same purpose while also giving us additional draw power. For our next level 3, we of course run our 4 copies of Tabermon. Just an awesome card. On deletion, draw 1 card. Really useful, whether you're charging them into your opponent's security or killing them with a Chimeramon to take out something on your opponent. You have tons of ways to get this guy dead, and whenever he does, draw an extra card. Who doesn't love that? Just doing what purple does best, having strong deletion effects to benefit from your own Digimon dying. Next up, we run 4 copies of Demi Deveman. Just a nice vanilla 2-cost rookie. Always nice to play, especially if you're sitting at 1 memory. Drop them on the field, put your opponent to 1, or start a game, you have a couple extra rookies. Always nice to be able to throw something super cheap to give your opponent as little memory as possible. That is something that this version of this deck is pretty good at. Obviously not as good as blue or green when it comes to starving your opponent for memory, but can still manage to do a good job of that, so it's always nice to have cheap cards in this deck. These are actually the only purple level 3s I run in this deck, so just sitting at 12. Sometimes it can be a little bit rough, but I find that I have enough draw power in this deck that even if I start off with kind of a slow, rocky start, or it takes a turn or 2 to get rookies, I'm usually able to pick things back up pretty quickly as soon as I get something out there that lets me draw cards. And even when I was running more copies of rookies in this deck, it was a similar issue. Sometimes in this game you just don't get rookies, so I kind of wasn't trying to just mitigate that. I was just trying to lean into what makes this deck as strong as possible, and when I do have a good start, it's a great start. Things get snowballing pretty quickly. And I was also already squeezing a lot into this deck, so there wasn't really a whole lot I was willing to sacrifice to squeeze in more purple rookies. But I found more often than not, starting off without a rookie isn't too big of an issue in this deck, and it doesn't happen that often. And even when it does, I have found it very possible to come back with this deck. Moving on to our level 4s, we of course run 4 copies of Devamon because blockers are extremely important, specifically with purple. Really good because if you ever throw out a Digimon and you have some Devamon in your trash, spring them out, stall out your opponent a little bit longer, or bring up your defense. Not much to say about them other than that, just our nice generic purple blocker for our deck. Next up, we run 3 copies of Devamon, just the 1 level 4 every opponent hates to see out on the field. Retaliation, such an awesome effect. It's always great to see the look on your opponent's face when they have left a level 3 on your board, they have a suspended level 6 or level 7 like Omnimon on the field, Digivolve into Devamon, and just the look of dread in their eyes when they see you crash your Devamon into their huge monster and take them out. Really useful, really strong card, helps our deck deal with some big monsters that we wouldn't normally have an answer for. And closing off our level 4s, we run 3 copies of Wizardmon. Honestly, such an awesome card. When the game first came out, I definitely did not utilize him as much as I should have been doing. We do not run any yellows in this deck, so really, he's just here for that on deletion effect. Draw 1 card when he dies. Really good. Again, another card that adds to the draw power of this deck. This card combos extremely well with our purple Gabumon, Digivolving into him. Whether he crashed into security or is killed by one of your opponent's monsters, you are going to be able to draw 3 cards and then just discard 1. Super good, awesome combo, and really helps us pick up the pace with this deck. And just to add on to that, Devamon is also a very good candidate to Digivolve onto our Gabumon, since the purpose of blockers is usually to kind of just die anyway and protect you from that extra security hit. So in addition to blocking that, you can also be getting value, getting those cards to your hand, and helping yourself have a better option of responding to your opponent on the next turn. So really, just both of these awesome cards for Gabumon, but specifically Wizardmon, being able to draw 3 cards, just super useful. Moving on to our level 5s, we are solely running our 4 copies of Chimeramon, probably the best purple level 5 in the game right now. Super useful, just awesome card to throw out there, delete one of your opponent's Digimon, wipe something big from their board. Especially awesome when you're able to pull this guy out multiple turns in a row. Just works super well with the rest of the cards, being able to pop a Tabermon or a Wizardmon to destroy something bigger on your opponent's board while also getting that extra card draw, and then still leaving your opponent with a pretty decent sized monster on the board that they are going to have to either respond to or just deal with next turn when you start swinging at security. Moving into our level 6s, we run 3 copies of Piedmon, our purple Dark Master. For a little while, I was testing this deck without Piedmon. That was stupid. I don't know why I did that. I was kind of just experimenting with some other level 6s, seeing different things like that. And in earlier versions of this deck, I would have really strong early games, and the problem I was having was running out of steam at the end and not really having a good card to help me close the game. And in all of those situations, Piedmon was probably that card that I needed. Part of my reasoning for originally taking him out was just the extremely high play cost he has. While yes, bringing a really useful effect, I at times struggled with the ability for opponents to kind of retaliate on top of that just from having so much memory you give them. But in this version of this deck, since there are some useful ways to get extra memory, it has not been as big of an issue or concern to me. And of course, it is also just extremely useful to have the ability to bring out some of our powerful level 4s from this deck, like a Devamon, bringing out Devamon for blockers, or even bringing out some of our level 3s like Tabermon so we can get some more card draw while also crashing into our opponent's board. On top of Piedmon, the one other purple level 6 I'm playing is the 1 copy of Metal Garurumon. Partially, he's just in here for fun because I have Matt, and so why not also toss our Metal Garurumon in here? But he can also occasionally come in handy when we have a Chimeramon on the field that's managed to survive a turn or two, being able to Digivolve into Metal Garurumon, swing at your opponent's board, and also being able to bring in a level 3 from your trash is extremely useful. He definitely isn't the best card at this moment, but I think once we get into set 1.5, he's going to become a lot more useful, especially with some of the cheaper Digivolution options we're going to have into, he's going to be a much easier card to get up to. In future versions of this deck, I hope to be able to use him a little bit more and kind of focus more on the Metal Garurumon side of this deck. But for right now, I just run him on 1. It's nice to have the option. I found Lilithmon wasn't super useful for me in this deck. I'm not running a whole lot of purple option cards, and a lot of times when I drew into her, she wasn't helping me as much as I wanted her to. So I found a 3 Piedmon and a 1 Metal Garurumon just for those specific situations where he happens to be useful was a lot better for me. Now running into our purple option cards, we play 3 copies of Night Raid. Super useful, super awesome card. Just being able to bring back any level 3 from your board for 2 memory. It's really useful. Typically I'm bringing out Tippermon, but sometimes I am also bringing out the Gabumon, especially if I have a level 4 that I can Digivolve him into, such as Devamon or Wizardmon, and just crash into the enemy the next turn for some extra card draw. And we have our 3 copies of Trump Sword. At times I would like to run 4, but then there have also been times where I have too many Trump Swords and not enough targets to use them on, so I've been fine running 3 for now. I have considered replacing this card with Casitas Breath. Sometimes having to target an opponent's unsuspended Digimon can be really rough. There's been tons of times on the board where Trump Sword comes out of my security at the very last moment, or my opponent has swung with everything on their turn and now I have no actual targets I can use my Trump Sword on, while Casitas Breath can be used on anything. The problem I have with that card though is just the fact that the card goes back to your opponent's hands can sometimes be rough and almost more useful for your opponents. For example, when you are playing against an Omnimon, you're sending that Omnimon back to your opponent's hand. Yes, they have to Digivolve back up to it, but for example, if your opponent's playing a blue Omnimon turbo deck, it's probably going to be really easy for them to get back up to Omnimon. Then you're just going to have to deal with him all over again, plus he's getting that extra card deletion when he comes back out on the field. But for now, I run 3 copies of Trump Sword and I've been pretty fine with it, especially since I have Devamon and Piedmon as our alternate forms of removal that we can deal with their retaliation, which really helps us deal with any threats that Trump Sword might be struggling with. Rounding things off, we run our 2 copies of Matt. Really awesome card. Always good to have the memory effect where you start off your turn with 3 if your opponent leaves you with anything less. And just the ability to return 1 purple option or Digimon card to your hand, really useful. I've considered running more of him, but in this version of this deck, 2 seems to be the perfect amount. And again, in this version of a purple deck, we're not as focused as many other purple variations are on discarding cards from your hand or deck to the trash. So just having the 2 copies seems pretty good. And we already have a lot of ways to draw cards from our deck, so I find the ability to return a purple card to your hand, while still very useful, isn't as crucial of a need in this deck as it could be. And for our 2 non-purple level 6s that we run, we have our Volcanic Dramon and 1 copy of Puppetmon as our tech cards. Volcanic Dramon, of course, always useful to have, especially for Rookie Rush or just any big spammy boards that like to throw out a bunch of lower level monsters. And Puppetmon, of course, really good card that can sometimes stall out your opponent or also prevent your opponent from swinging at you for game and setting you up for a possible game-ending swing next turn. Now for our fun part of this deck, we have the purple engine. Starting out, we run 3 copies of the rare version of the blue Gabumon. Just awesome effect. Cost 3, on play, trigger draw 1. Again, just kind of focusing on the draw power of this deck, giving us extra ways to get cards, and a nice cheaper-ish drop earlier in the game, which can really just give us a lot of help and a lot of value, just speeding along our ability to get to all of the more important cards in our deck that we need. And also just serving as an extra blue body for our Hammer Sparks in this deck, which I will get to in a moment. Next up, we run 3 copies of the 2-cost blue Matt Ashita. Really awesome card. He's mostly in here just to give us the ability to play Hammer Spark, but has also just been an extremely useful card. Just every time your opponent has Digimon with no Digivolution cards, gain 1 memory. This deck is pretty good at memory starving your opponent. because we play a lot of low memory cost cards. So in lots of games with opponents, I've gotten to a point where I've kind of basically forced them to play something big on the board. And of course, whenever they're playing something directly to your hand, that means they will have no Digivolution sources, and you will be getting that one extra memory. Even when I've had times where I've had multiple of these on the field, I am usually never disappointed because it always comes in useful, and just having extra memory is always really good. And he of course combos very well with the purple version of him, easily making it so on a lot of your turns you can be starting off with 4 or 5 memory, just giving you a huge edge on your opponent and letting you come back and hit them really hard on your turn. And of course, to end things off, why else would we be playing blue other than to play 4 copies of Hammer Spark? This card is awesome in this deck because typically when you're starting off, everyone assumes you're just playing a regular old purple deck. Then they swing at security, see Hammer Spark, ends their turn, awesome. Or your opponent leaves you with 1 memory, they think you're gonna be limited on options, boom, throw out a couple Hammer Sparks in your hand. Really good, really lets you surprise your opponents and make your plays a little bit less predictable. And when combined with our mats, gives us a lot of nice ways to gain memory in this deck, which was typically a problem I was having with purple, where a lot of times I didn't have quite as much memory as I would have liked. But this version of the deck is super fun. Between the blue Gabumon and some of our Digimon like Devamon and purple Gabumon, we have tons of draw power, and having that extra memory to be able to capitalize on that has been really fun. And again, like I mentioned, can really throw off your opponents and make your deck a little bit harder to predict. So that is our Blurple deck. We have the 10 card blue engine, just giving us a little bit of extra memory, a little bit of extra draw power. And then the rest of our purple deck, I found that this deck is very flexible and makes it really easy to respond to a lot of situations. We have Chimeramon for some deletion. We have tons of monsters for card draw. We have Devamon and Piedmon, who are able to take out some pretty big threats with retaliation. Of course, we have our Trump Sword. We have our Night Ray to get some extra cards out on the field. It's been a really interactive deck, and it's a lot of fun and lets you be really flexible. And I always have a good time trying to figure out what the best strategy is to play around my opponents given the cards that I have in this deck. Now, this deck will soon be obsolete with the coming of 1.5. But I do think it's still a deck that has some potential to be fun. I think blue and purple are a pretty cool color mix. In the future, I'd like to be able to focus a little bit more on Metal Garurumon, since I do think he's a really awesome card. Just being able to swing at your opponent every turn while bringing out an extra level 3, super nice, and it makes him a threat your opponent really has to deal with. I do think he will be a lot more useful going forward because we will have Meramon as our 1 cost level 4 and Skull Meramon as our 2 cost level 5, really making it a lot cheaper and easier to Digivolve up to him. And that should make him a much more easily accessible level 6 for the deck, and give other options other than just playing him on top of Chimeramon, since Chimeramon is an expensive card to play. And up till this point, Chimeramon has probably been the most heavily played level 5 and purple cards, so having other cheaper options to bring out on the field and Digivolve into will be really nice. When Meramon and Skull Meramon are out, I also think Kaiser Nail is going to be a really useful card to put in this deck. I have seen some cards that already use it. I tried it out with this deck, didn't seem to be as useful to me, but once we have a purple deck where we can Digivolve up more easily and for cheaper values, I think Kaiser Nail will be really cool. So I might replace the blue Gabumon with Kaiser Nail, or just squeeze some more room into this deck to put a couple copies of that in, because then attacking with your Metal Garurumon, being able to bring out level 3s, and also being able to play a Kaiser Nail on Metal Garurumon to get those extra purples out there is going to be really cool. And those are the changes I'm currently planning to make this deck once it gets to 1.5. I haven't actually been testing with 1.5 yet, but that is something I really want to do because I really like the blue and purple mat working together. I love the purple Garurumon line. Not as strong as some of the other Digivolution lines, but I think there's a place for it, and I really want to try to make the best Garurumon mat purple focus theme possible, and I think having those blue cards in there does help with that. But that is the deck, everyone. It might not be the most competitive deck out there, but I've actually had a lot of success with it. As I've slowly tweaked it throughout the past couple weeks. It's been, if nothing else, a very fun, different option to play. And as Set 1.5 comes out, purple is a color that's only going to continue to get stronger, which I'm very excited about because purple is probably my second favorite color in the game right after black. So I plan to be tweaking this deck out in the next couple of weeks, trying out different things to see if I can keep Blurple going and make the best, most fun variation of this deck as possible that I can. So that is the video. Thank you all for watching. Set 1.5 comes out in just a couple days now, and I will see you with some new unboxing videos and some new decks soon. Gonna be a great time. Tons of new cards to play around with.